Close your eyes for a moment. Now imagine you open them, and everything is gone. Not just your phone, not just your comfort, your entire century. Every system that has ever protected you, medicine, heat, law, clean water, the assumption that tomorrow is likely, none of it exists anymore. You are lying on a bed of straw, in a single dark room somewhere in England, and the year is approximately 900 AD. You did not choose this. You were simply born here. And that single fact, the accident of your birth, has already decided how hard your life will be, how short it will likely become, and how little control you will ever have over either. The first thing your body registers is the cold. Not the cold of an uncomfortable morning, the cold of a world that does not heat itself for you. It has settled into the walls overnight, into the floor, into the wool blanket that was never quite enough. The fire is nearly dead, just a few embers beneath a skin of ash, and the smoke it produced through the night has gone nowhere. It hangs in the air like something permanent. Your eyes burn before you are fully awake. Your lungs have been breathing this since childhood. You do not notice it anymore. That, in itself, tells you something about what this world does to a person over time. Then, the smell. Earth and animal and rot and something sour that has no name in your vocabulary because it has simply always been there. A pig moves in the corner. Chickens scratch beneath the bench where your children are still sleeping. There are no separate rooms, no privacy, no silence. There is only this. One space, one fire, one family pressed together against everything outside these walls. Before you rise, before this day begins its demands, consider this. Historians who study this period have found something written not in documents, but in bone. The average body recovered from an Anglo-Saxon burial site tells a story of a life that was likely over before the age of 40. Not because of one disaster, but because of the accumulation, morning after morning, exactly like this one, with no end and no relief in sight. You did not choose this life. That is the first truth you must understand. In early medieval England, the moment you were born determined almost everything that would follow. If your father worked the land, you worked the land. If your mother carried water before sunrise, you would carry water before sunrise. There was no path that led somewhere different, no door that opened to another world. Your future arrived before you were old enough to question it, and it looked exactly like your past. The village was not just where you lived, it was the boundary of your entire existence. The fields fed you. The forest gave you timber and fuel. The church gave you meaning. And beyond that, beyond those tree lines and dirt roads, was a world most people in your village would never see. Not because they feared it, but because they simply could not leave. The land needed them. The Lord above them made sure of it. So you rise. Before the light is fully formed in the sky, your body is already moving. The soil must be broken before planting, and breaking it means hours behind a wooden plow, your shoulders bearing the resistance of the earth with every step. By mid-morning, your hands are raw. By midday, your back has begun to speak to you in a language made entirely of pain. You carry, you cut, you dig, you haul. Not because anyone is watching, but because a broken plow at the wrong moment, a field left unplanted, a harvest that comes in thin. Any one of these could mean your family does not eat through winter. Archaeologists who study Anglo-Saxon remains have found the evidence written directly into bone. Compressed spines, damaged joints, healed fractures in arms and legs that were never fully rested. These were not the bodies of people who had accidents. These were bodies shaped over decades by work that began in childhood and never truly stopped. Your body in this world was not your own. It was a tool, and like every tool, it was used until it could no longer serve its purpose. The land did not belong to you. You belonged to the land, and everything, your time, your strength, your future, was owed to it first, before anything else. But the work was not the worst part. What happened after sunset was, after sunset, you eat. And this is where the second truth of this world reveals itself. Quietly, without warning, in the most ordinary moment of your day. The bread on your wooden board is dark and heavy, rye or barley, coarse enough to feel like grinding stone against your teeth. You eat it not because it satisfies you, but because tomorrow demands a body that can still move. There is no pleasure here. There is only fuel. But what you do not know, what no one in this world knows, is that the grain you are eating may already be working against you. During wet seasons, stored grain could develop invisible contamination, producing substances that slowly damaged the nervous system, caused burning sensations in the limbs, confusion, and in severe cases, convulsions. Entire villages suffered, without understanding why. They prayed, they fasted, they looked for signs of divine punishment. The answer was sitting in their bread, and they had no way to see it. The water you drink carries the same deception. It looks clear. It comes from the same stream your grandmother used, the same well your neighbors draw from every morning. It feels safe because it is familiar. But familiarity in this world is not the same as safety. Waste from homes, from animals, from the daily movement of a crowded village, all of it finds its way into the same water sources. There are no systems to separate the clean from the dangerous. A child falls ill. A family grows weak. The village watches and names it fate, names it God's will, names it anything except what it actually is. Contaminated water quietly spreading through every household that trusts it. And then you return to your home, believing that at least here, behind these walls, you are protected. But your home is not a refuge. The smoke from your central hearth has nowhere to go. It fills the upper half of the room every single night, and you breathe it for hours while you sleep. Fleas move through the straw of your bedding. Rodents travel the same floors your children walk on. The animals kept inside during winter, for warmth, bring moisture and parasites that thrive in the dark and the cold. Archaeologists have found evidence of this in the remains of Anglo-Saxon homes, not just in the structure of the buildings, but in the bones of the people who lived inside them. The damage was cumulative. It built up over years, and most people never connected it to the place they called home. There is one moment, though, that makes all of this feel real in a way that numbers and history cannot. Imagine a child, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, waking in the night with a fever. No medicine exists that can reach her in time. No physician is coming. Her mother presses a damp cloth to her forehead and whispers something, a prayer, a name, a promise. By morning, the fever has broken, or it has not. In this world, those two outcomes were separated by almost nothing. And parents lived with that knowledge every single day, loving their children in full awareness of how little stood between them and loss. That is not history. That is a kind of courage that most of us will never be asked to understand. You survived the invisible. The things in your food, your water, your air, your home, none of them announced themselves. None of them gave you a chance to fight back. But nothing, not hunger, not disease, not the slow damage of a lifetime of labor, could prepare you for what came next. The cold, the hunger, the disease, those were the visible walls of this world. But there was another kind of wall, one you could not touch, could not see, and could never climb over. The society you were born into was not simply a community. It was a structure designed to keep everything exactly as it was. At the top, kings made decisions about land and war. Below them, lords controlled the fields you worked and the village you lived in. The church shaped what you believed, what you feared, and what you hoped for after death. And at the bottom, holding all of it up with their hands and their backs and their broken bodies, were people like you. The system did not ask for your consent. It simply expected your obedience, and in most cases, it received it, not because people were weak, but because there was genuinely nowhere else to go. The church, in particular, occupied a strange and powerful place in daily life. On one hand, it offered something this world desperately needed, meaning. When a child died, when a harvest failed, when disease moved through a village and took 3 families in a single week, the church provided an answer. It said that suffering had purpose, that endurance was sacred, that the life waiting beyond this one would be better than anything experienced here. For people carrying impossible weight, that was not a small thing. That was survival of a different kind. But the church also enforced. It defined what was acceptable, what was sinful, what deserved punishment. It sat beside the Lord in the hierarchy of control, and together, they shaped the boundaries of an ordinary person's entire existence. And then, on an ordinary morning, a morning that began exactly like every other, war arrived. Not as a distant rumor, not as a king's problem, but as smoke on the horizon. and the sound of movement where there should have been silence. Raiders could appear without warning. A village built over generations could be unrecognizable by nightfall. You were not a soldier. You were a farmer holding a tool that was never meant to be a weapon, standing between everything you loved and something you had no power to stop. Archaeologists have uncovered the evidence of these moments in burned settlement remains, in abandoned homesteads, in defensive structures built by people who had already learned the cost of being unprepared. What kept people standing through all of it was not strength in the way we usually imagine it. It was each other. The neighbor who helped replant after a destroyed harvest. The woman who sat with a grieving mother through the night. The shared knowledge of how to survive another winter, passed not through books, but through presence and repetition and trust. Community was not a comfort in this world. It was a survival mechanism. And perhaps that is the most quietly devastating truth of all. That the line between surviving and truly living was drawn not by what the world gave you, but by who stood beside you when it took everything away. Yet even after all of this, after the hunger and the smoke and the fear and the loss, they chose to wake up again. Think about everything they carried. Not the grain, not the firewood, not the plow. The weight that had no name. The kind that settles into a person when the world offers no guarantee that tomorrow will come. And they choose to prepare for it anyway. That is what survival looked like in early medieval England. Not heroism, not conquest, not the stories written into history books by people who never touched a plow or lost a child to a fever in the night. It looked like an ordinary person, in an ordinary room, making the decision to rise one more time into a world that had never once promised to be kind to them. We tend to think of adaptation as something that happens over centuries, in the slow movement of civilizations. But adaptation is also what happens in a single moment, when a person looks at everything they have lost and decides that what remains is still worth protecting. The people of early medieval England had no word for resilience. They simply lived it, quietly, without record, without recognition, and without them, the thread that connects us to this moment would not exist. Their blood is in us. Their endurance is in us. Their capacity to hold on when holding on makes no rational sense. That is in us too. So here is the question they leave behind. Across more than 1,000 years of silence, what would you have held on to? What, in the end, would have been enough to make you rise? There is no wrong answer, but there is something important in the asking. At Primal Echoes, that question is what drives everything we explore. The forgotten lives, the vanished worlds, the people history never named, but could never have existed without. If that is the kind of story that stays with you, you are already part of what we are building here. The fire is nearly out, but it has not gone dark yet.